You are tuned in to the Monday Night Carlo, Sports and Entertainment Sportscast. And now, without further ado, I give to you the one and only Carlo.
Hello everybody and welcome to Monday Night Carlo. You are tuned in to a very special edition of Monday Night Carlo this week. It is a 1 hour special. Well, it's going to be just over that, I think, but it's a special based upon the life and times of David Penzer, the former WCW TNA ring announcer. He joins us this week, and what a conversation I had with him. Really, really nice guy, a lot of stories to tell, and we start off the podcast with the kind of questions he's probably been asked a lot, so it eases in, but a few minutes in, it gets very, very interesting. We talk about life in general, we talk about wrestling in general, we talk about the life and times of TNA, we talk about WCW, and we even discuss the sad demise of Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Hennig. It all gets pretty deep and pretty personal, but it's all well worth a listen. It's a brilliant talk, and it's right now, right here, exclusively on Monday Night Carlo. So this is me interviewing David Penzer. Okay, everybody, welcome to the interview section for Monday Night Carlo. We are live, you are here, and we are joined on the line by the former WCW TNA ring announcer, David Penzer. David, welcome to Monday Night Carlo. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good. So let's start by telling us just a little bit about your upbringing and all that kind of stuff.
I was born in the Bronx, New York.
Yeah?
I moved to Florida when I was 6. We lived in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale. Let's see. I have a younger brother. I'm the oldest of 3. I have a younger brother. I have a sister who was we adopted from Korea when she was 2 years old.
Right.
And my dad was a psychologist, so we had a pretty cool life. We weren't living in Trump Tower, but it was. I can't complain.
That's pretty cool. So tell us about how you came involved with ring announcing.
Well, I was a mobile DJ growing up. Went up and set up at bar mitzvahs, sweet 16s, weddings, all kinds of different parties. I started doing that when I was about 17 years old, when I got my driver's license, maybe 16.
Right.
And, by the time I was 17 and a half, 18 years old, I was working pretty much, I was still a senior in high school, but I'm working pretty much Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, pulling $800 on New Year's Eve, pretty decent money. And so I got pretty good at talking on a mic. I've always been a huge wrestling fan from the age of 12, huge fan. Not only, cheer the good guys and boo the bad guys, that kind of thing, but I was enamored by the business. I would write down, and I had my own little in my head wrestling organization.
Right.
And I booked the darn thing. I was almost embarrassed, but I was 13, 14 years old. So I just enamored by the whole thing, and I had no idea, never thought in a million years that I'd get involved. At the time, there was a group called the Global Wrestling Alliance. It was based in South Florida, where I lived. It was in the boom of the WrestleMania, Hulkamania period, when wrestling was the hottest thing on the cover of Sports Illustrated and all that stuff. And what this company did is they put the company up on what's called the penny stock market, which
right.
is people could come on and for really cheap invest in a wrestling company. So they raised some money. I don't know how much, but enough to be able to do some tapings and have some money and pay some salaries and stuff like that. I never got a salary, but I did get my in. As I told you earlier, my dad is a psychologist, and the booker of Global Wrestling Alliance was a guy by the name of Bob Roop, been great amateur wrestler and been around for about 20 years.
Right.
And the guy who ran it, he was kind of an indie guy named Dr. Red Roberts. He did indies in Florida. He did a psychologist wrestling gimmick. He got in people's minds. Well, that was kind of kind of true because he was a psychologist in real life. And so one of the guys that worked for my dad as a counselor at the time, because my dad had a little counseling center with people that worked underneath him.
Right.
And he knew this guy. His real name is Dr. Michael Brannon. He actually is pretty famous now in some circles as being an expert witness for court cases.
Right.
And so he went up to, without boring the audience any further, they said, hey, my boss, at the counseling center has a son who loves professional wrestling. He's a DJ. If you need a ring announcer, he could do that. Any chance you need anybody? And they were doing a taping at the Diplomat Hotel. And they said, no, but have him come by. So I went there and I met Dr. Red Roberts, and he kind of just told me to kind of hang out. I didn't go backstage, although I think I could have, if my memory serves me correctly, but I wanted to be respectful and not look like a mark. My whole life I tried not to look like a mark. Then I come on a radio show and admit that I'm a mark. There's actually a really funny story about Ric Flair.
Right.
Somewhere in between this whole journey we're about to go on for the next however long. But that goes into not trying to look like a mark and backfiring. But anyway, so they started doing shows in different, towns. They did, and they had a ring announcer for the Diplomat, but
right.
They didn't. I don't know if he didn't work out. I'm not really sure. I went to their training school a couple of times. The legendary Boris Malenko was their trainer, and
nice.
He would kind of teach me the business a little bit. Let me in a little bit.
Yeah.
And they called me one time and they said, we need you to do would you be interested in ring announcing a show?
Right.
I said, sure. And so, God, I can't remember the name of the town. Hopefully it'll come to me, but it was in the middle of nowhere. And, but it was a pretty loaded show. I mean,
right.
for back in the day for independent, I think the main event was Iron Sheik versus Corporal Kirshner, hot off of the WWE
nice.
thing at the time. Adrian Street was there with Linda, and Ox Baker was there, and the Malenko brothers were there, and
nice.
It was pretty loaded. So, they say, oh, thanks for coming, go to the dressing room, we'll give you the matches, and you could go find out about the towns. Well, I had, never been in a professional wrestling locker room, and while I was sort of smart, I kind of thought, hey, I've been to these training sessions from Malenko down there at the school, and I see that they cooperate with each other. I didn't know. You don't know.
No.
And back then, you never told either. We would not be having this conversation 20 years ago but, for a radio show, let alone a conversation just between two guys. But, now that it's all out of the bag and, it's a totally different era, I could tell a story like that. But, I walked in, still thinking that, they don't hate each other, but I'm sure that they don't really socialize together. I didn't know what to expect. All I know is Corporal Kirshner's in there doing his own thing. I said hello, introduced myself. I'm the ring announcer. Iron Sheik walks in. He goes around to everybody in the dressing room. Hello, sir. How are you? Hello, sir. How are you? Hello, sir. How are you? He got Corporal Kirshner, stood up. They gave each other a big hug. And they start talking about what they've been doing since the last time they saw each other, like they're best buddies. And I'm like, oh my God, this whole thing is a total complete. I don't want to say the word farce because it's not, but from what they want you to believe,
yeah,
and what they've got you to believe, it's a total 180. These guys are buddies hanging out in real life, and then later you hear the story, ironically, about the Iron Sheik and Jim Duggan getting caught on a highway driving together when they were in a feud, and that sort of opened people's eyes, but I didn't know at the time. So anyway, that was my first entree into professional wrestling as a ring announcer, and I would do shows for them. I promoted some shows for them. We after the promotion shut down, me and Bob Root bought the ring, and we went and did shows at flea markets, and
right.
We did a couple shows at Key West High School using the global tapes, and so that's sort of how I got involved in professional wrestling. I wasn't making any money really, unless I promoted the shows and they made a little bit of a profit, but but I had the opportunity to do what I loved. That was my passion. That I thought, hey, I would never get a chance to do this, and now I'm doing it. Little did I know, there was a lot bigger and better things to come.
That is very, very cool. So how did you first get involved with WCW, and were you nervous on your first event?
Well, I didn't. I worked for them for about 3 years before I even ring announced. What happened was Bob Roop as I told you, was the booker at Global Wrestling, and we bought the ring together, so we were sort of business partners. And he was back in the Georgia Championship Wrestling days. He was sort of Ole's right-hand man, like back in the day. I'm trying to think of his name. Grizzly Smith was Cowboy Bill Watts' right-hand man. Cowboy Bill Watts wouldn't go on the road to all these small little shows, so he'd send Grizzly Smith, who's Jake Roberts' father, and Grizzly Smith would get the finishes. Grizzly Smith would take care of the money and all that stuff. Well, that was what Bob for Ole back in the Georgia Championship Wrestling days. So when Ole got the book for WCW, he called Bob and said, "Do you want to be an agent?"
Right.
And Bob said, "That sure beats doing setting up my own ring at the flea market to make $500. Hell yeah!" So he promised me he'd get me an in, but they had 2 ring announcers. They didn't need a third. And so what happened was he hooked me up with a legendary guy who was instrumental in my career as much as Bob or anybody else, by the name of Jody Hamilton, the original assassin.
Right.
And what Jody did, among other things for WCW back in the day, is book the enhancement talent. They would tell him we have 25 squash matches, and he would be in charge of getting 25 job guys that could make the guys look good. And so what he would do, and this was pretty standard back in the day, there was Rip Rogers in Ohio and Kentucky, there was Chick Donovan, there was George South and the Italian Stallion out of the Carolinas. And what they would do is they would book guys. They also wrestled, so they got a payday for wrestling, but then they would get a small percentage of the money that the job guys made.
Right.
Kind of a booking fee. Exactly, a booking fee. So Jody hooked me up with that situation, but I didn't wrestle, so all I was doing is getting a booking fee. So if I booked 5 guys, I got a little bit more than $100.
Got you.
And for the pleasure of doing this, I had to leave my house at 12 midnight on a Sunday night. I had to go across Alligator Alley. Anybody who is familiar with Florida, that's an hour and a half of nothing but darkness. I had to go up the other side of the west side of Florida, which is where I live now, up through Tampa, then back across I-4 to Orlando. So I was crisscrossing Florida, picking up guys, and then we drive all the way to Atlanta at that point. So probably about 15, 16 hours round trip. They started doing double shots when they went to Center State, so it wasn't as bad because at least we would stay over, and I'd get 2 shows and two booking fees. But the first time it was just we didn't even get to sleep. It was taking turns driving. It was pretty crazy. And and I was working as a waiter in Ruby Tuesdays.
Right.
During the rest of the time, trying to squeak out a living. My wife worked for my father as an office manager, and she wasn't was she my wife at the time? Pretty close. And no, she wasn't, as a matter of fact, not when I started. I eked out a living, so that's how I got involved in WCW. Well, what happened was Jim Ross kind of saw me hanging around and said, "Hey kid, will you help run guys for interviews?"
Right.
Because in the buildings they would do those interviews that were select market interviews. I don't know if you ever saw them over in England. I don't even know if they did them in England, but basically you'd see them on Worldwide or any of the shows where they would be specialized to your market. So,
right.
If wrestling was coming to War Memorial Auditorium in Fort Lauderdale, they'd act like they were talking to you. They'd talk about the show, and then the wrestler would come in and say, it did this Friday night in War Memorial in Fort Lauderdale. I'm going to kick such and such butt. And so I would run guys to do those interviews because they would do hundreds of them every TV taping. And I started doing other things, helping with the format, running off the format, signing guys in because they had a sign-in sheet for all the wrestlers. Junkyard Dog actually named me the walking man. All I did was walk around, whether it was getting the sheet signed or running guys. I was called the walking man back then. But so I still wasn't making any extra money. WCW paid for the van that we rented and the gas.
Right.
But I was working my way in, so I finally had the guts to call to go up to Jim Ross and say, hey, I think I've proven, that I belong here, for nothing else, running errands. So I just want you to know that I was a ring announcer, and I've been a professional DJ. If you ever have the need for a ring announcer, please, consider me. And he said, sure, no problem. So, I did that. Nothing really happened. They had Tony Gilliam and Gary Capetta. And so Tony Gilliam got fired. So the only problem with that was Jim Ross had left about a month earlier to go work for WWE, and at about the same time, Tony Schiavone came back from WWF to WCW and sort of assumed the same spot. So right after Tony Gilliam got fired, Tony Schiavone came up to me and said, "You're David Penzer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You drive the guys up and down from Florida, right?" And I thought he was going to say, "You want to try as a ring announcer?" And I was all excited. And he said, "Next week, could you pick up this guy that used to ring announce for WWE? He lives in Tampa, and bring him up. We're going to try him out." And my heart sunk.
Oh, man.
I was like, Penzer, this is your one and only chance. So I said, Mr. Schiavone, I know that you just got back, that I had a discussion with Jim Ross when he was here, and I told him, and I don't know if he told you when you guys were crisscrossing, but I am a ring announcer as well, and I sort of was hoping for an opportunity if the job ever opened up, and I was under the impression that I might be able to have the opportunity. Is there any way?
Right.
He said, "Oh, I didn't know that. What? Bring up the guy, and he'll do it next week, and you'll do it the week after, and who's ever the best will get the job." And so I had an opportunity. I think it was in Macon, Georgia. I wrote everything down word for word. I was petrified. Because I had worked my butt off driving, crisscrossing all over the frickin' South.
Yeah.
I'd seen more of the state of Florida than I'd ever care to see in a car or a van. And this was my one and only shot. And if I blew it, I might as well take my ball and go home. I was petrified. But I got through it. And the other announcer who did his tryout blew a couple of names, announced the wrong guy at the wrong time. I actually think I probably won by default. I probably think they figured I was driving guys up anyway, so they didn't have to pay for my trans. They're already paying trans for the job guys, so why not? But I didn't care. I got the job, and I just started watching. I'd always watched Gary Capetta and watch him how he worked the crowd.
Yeah, man.
He was great at working the crowd, and especially through these long, boring squash TV tapings. So I just eventually they started flying me in, and I was getting paid actually to be there instead of just getting paid the booking fee, and so that was a really cool time in my life. Referee Pee Wee Anderson kind of took me under his wing,
right?
Showed me the ropes on the road. Started hanging out with instead of hanging out with the job guys, which I didn't mind, they were a blast. I started hanging out with some of the top guys, Dustin Rhodes, Barry Windham. Eventually, Arn Anderson, because Arn and Pee Wee broke into business together from Rome, Georgia.
Nice.
And then later, Flair, and one of the coolest things probably I ever got. I don't want to say the coolest things, but one of the coolest experiences was to get to do ride around, do loops for almost a year with Arn and Rick, just me, Arn and Rick, and. And it was nuts, man. It was crazy. That's when he was the world champion, and he's Ric Flair is Ric Flair. What you see is what you get. It's not an act. It's not like he turns into Ric Flair when the lights go on, like Hulk does when the lights go on.
Really?
Ric Flair is Ric Flair 365 days a year, and it doesn't matter if there's a camera on him or if he's in a bar with two people. He is Ric Flair, and what you see is what you get. And I think the only negative thing about that is I think in hindsight he wishes he could have saved up a little bit more money instead of being Ric Flair and buying rounds of drinks every night in every town. But, you got to say, you only live once in life, and if Ric Flair were to look back at his life, he might have said he made a few mistakes, but I think he enjoyed every day of his life from the day he became Ric Flair, R-I-C-F-L-A-I-R, instead of Richard Flair. I know he enjoyed every day of his life to the fullest. So you got to give people credit for that. They say live life to the fullest, and he certainly did.
He did indeed. He seems a pretty cool guy. So let's talk about your voice, man. Because one thing I noticed about you is your voice. That's your trademark, if you like. So where did you come up with the David Penzer voice?
I don't know. I don't know. There is a David Penzer voice. I mean, I do. People say do the ring announcer voice. People that don't know that that friends of mine that don't know me from the wrestling business, just know me from here around where I live and stuff like that, and they'll hear I was a ring announcer. They'll say, "Well, you don't sound like a ring announcer." My wife will say, "Well, do the ring announcer voice." No, I don't want to do that. I don't even know what I know what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess from my days as a DJ, I dabbed in radio a little bit in high school, doing high school radio. It was a unique high school radio station.
Right.
I had a bunch of credit that I didn't need to go to regular classes, so I did high school radio. So maybe from that, I really don't know. But, it turned into a pretty cool ring announcing voice, according to, even Jeff Jarrett loves it. The first time I was back, I worked for TNA for them. He's like, I came back. I'm like, happy with that? He's like, love that voice.
Yeah, man, it is a pretty cool voice. It's something that I recognise you for. It's definitely something that I miss hearing in TNA. And speaking about TNA, what happened there, David?
Well, really, it lasted probably a lot longer than it was originally planned to.
Right.
I lived in Tampa. They taped in Orlando. Jeremy Borash, who had started the company basically from the ground floor with them, was their ring announcer. And I think Shane Douglas was doing the interviews, backstage interviews. And Shane had some issues, took some time off to get those issues fixed. They moved Jeremy to interviews, and Jeff called me and said, would you like to come and work here in Orlando? And they offered, what I thought was pretty decent money, per night.
Yeah.
I said, sure, why not? See how long it lasts. He said, I just want to be honest with you since we're friends. He said, JB is our guy.
Right,
so
right.
As soon as JB goes back to ring announcing, we're probably not going to have a spot for you. So I just want to be up front. So I thought I'd be lucky to get, 3 months while Shane was gone. Well, JB, he was so great, and it still is, in my opinion. I don't know why they don't have him do it more. The backstage, Mean Gene stuff.
Yeah.
Probably second best to Mean Gene in the business. I mean, that's a big compliment. That's a big compliment, but he's really, really good and really witty on his game. And so he was so good that he earned that spot, and I got the ring announcer spot, and actually got to travel a little bit, to do, when we did pay-per-views and stuff like that, which I figured I'd always just do Orlando and go home. But,
right.
Had great times. Wouldn't trade the time I got to spend with Mike Tenay and Don West for anything. We had some amazing times. The three of us got along really well, so it was an awesome opportunity. They, for whatever reason, decided they didn't want JB to do the backstage interviews anymore. I think they were getting more into the Jason Hervey, just being behind the camera, asking questions instead of having a guy standing back there.
Yeah.
And so basically I was told, I got a call from Terry Taylor, and Terry Taylor always told me, when I call you, the first thing I'm going to tell you is, I'm not calling to fire you. And so whenever he would call me for something, he would say, I'm not calling to fire you. And just so I guess that was just a way, since he was the guy who fired people, so that was the way of getting that out of the way.
Yeah.
And it was interesting enough because somebody had started a rumor about 2 months before that I had, unbeknownst to me, that I was going to stop working for WCW.
Right.
I didn't want to work there anymore. So Terry came up to me and said one day, about 2 months before I left, and said, "Are you leaving?" And I said, "Are you crazy?"
Where did that come from?
My house. What are you nuts? And he said, "Well, there's rumors out there that you're leaving." And I said, "I'm not leaving. Why would I leave?" So I figured at that point I was pretty safe. If they're worried about me leaving, then obviously they're happy with my work. They want me to, So when he called, usually when he would call, I would say, "Oh, it's time," and he would say, "Hi, it's Terry. I'm not firing you." And this time he said, "Hi, it's Terry Taylor." And I waited. And I said, "What happened today? I'm not firing you." He said, "Well, I'm not firing you, but I got to let you go." And I'm thinking, I finally got finally in this job. I figured that I had a longer term than I thought I did. I wasn't, and basically he just said, "We're replacing you." He didn't say with who. He said, "We're replacing you with somebody that's already on payroll."
Right.
So he said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You did a great job." Basically what he was telling me was, if Jared, what I found out later, not by anybody telling me, but figuring out because it was JB's voice doing the ring announcing the weeks I wasn't there until
right.
They made the move to Christie, maybe 6 months after that. But basically what they were telling me is, we're going to downsize a little bit, and if JB's not doing backstage interviews, we might as well have him doing ring announcing since he's getting paid on the payroll salary, and we're paying you per shot. Which makes sense, actually. I mean, was I disappointed? Sure, I was disappointed, but it makes sense. And 6 months or 3 months turned into 5 years, and made a lot of great friends, and had a blast. So I have no complaints on that at all.
Well, like I say, I definitely miss you in TNA and WCW. But we touched on other ring announcers. What is your thoughts on the Fink?
Oh, best in the world.
Yeah.
Back in the day, we got before the big wrestling boom, we got the Madison Square Garden channel down in where I lived. I was like the first guy on my block to get cable because I wanted to watch Georgia Championship Wrestling with the Freebirds, who were my favorite at the time. And Florida Championship Wrestling I already got. You could watch wrestling from the Olympic Auditorium, but you had to listen to it in Spanish. But the ring announcing from Jimmy Lennon was in English, so you know who you were watching. And then they had Madison Square Garden Network, where you could watch all the matches from Madison Square Garden, obviously. And Howard Finkel was the ring announcer. And my favorite segment, and probably, makes a lot of sense since I'm a ring announcer and I always wanted to be, but my favorite segment of the show were not the matches. It was before the last match that went on, which actually usually wasn't the main event. They usually put the main event on in the middle.
Right.
But before the last match of the show, Howard Finkel would run down the entire card for next month at Madison Square Garden to get the people hyped up and buy tickets, obviously. And he was the best. I mean, if he had a match that was good, that that the people got excited about, you could see him. He's even more excited. But there were some months that you would have like the WWF title on the line, Bob Backlund versus, and he would pause. The Samoan number 2, it wasn't even Austin Sika back then, or the Executioner number 2, and his build-up would be so good that people would clap, and I think they'd clap and get all excited because he was excited, and then they kind of think that kind of sucks. But that was my favorite part. I wish they still had those, and when they played the Madison Square Gardens, they edited those out because most people could care less about the card coming up next month that happened 30 years ago. But I wish they would include those on, when they had, whatever's on the WWE Network, or when they had 24/7. I used to watch 24/7 because they had a great show called The Legends Roundtable. Which, if anybody is now has the WWE Network, I believe, I'm not sure that they're repeating a lot of those. If you never got to see them, awesome shows. They were hosted by Mean Gene, usually had Jim Ross.
That's right.
Michael Hayes, Pat Patterson, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, Mick Foley. They'd have different people, but they'd talk about a topic and they'd show little clips, and of back in the day and tell inside stories. And it was a great show. So, but I would watch the Madison Square Garden shows back when I had 24/7, and they never had those. And I'm probably the only one who misses them, except for Howard Finkel. By the way, just got to say, got to meet Howard Finkel several times. The nicest guy in the world.
Very cool.
The nicest guy in the world. To have a guy like that come up and say, "I'm a big fan of your work," to me, is like I wanted to, that was one of the biggest compliments that anybody's ever given me, is a guy like that to come up and be gracious to me. So, great guy, best ring announcer in the history of professional wrestling. Glad he has a Hall of Fame ring. He deserves it. Probably will be the only ring announcer, maybe Lillian Garcia, I don't know, but probably the only ring announcer that legitimately deserves to be in the Hall of Fame as a ring announcer, because of his accomplishments.
For me, I think you're on par with him, David, to be honest. In my opinion, you're on.
not to take anything away from me, I don't deserve to be in there. You know, I from the Justin Roberts of the world, who does a great job, from the Lillian Garcias, who not only sings a kick-ass national anthem but does a great job. Not taking away anything from that, but they're not as big a part of the show as when Howard Finkel got to do it.
Yeah.
You know, they're not a focal point. Whereas back in Howard's day, he was the focal point, and how he introduced people and how he sold things.
Yes.
How he presented the next month's card had a lot to do with if they're going to sell out Madison Square Garden or have a half house.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, the guy was drawing money. Ring announcers don't draw money anymore. So
I just
the guy
think
was drawing money. So that's why I think that, you know, he's probably the only one deserving of the Hall of Fame. If other ones get in there, God bless you. No jealousy. No, you know, I'm happy for anybody. You know, I certainly don't expect to be there, nor do I think I deserve it. You know, there's a lot of guys that behind the scenes in the business, referees, wrestlers that deserve it. Probably I could think of 1,000 before I do, and but no, Fink deserves it. It was a different era back then, and he was the best ever.
Definitely, I think wrestling as a whole is a whole different beast now. I mean, even the calling of the match is when they're talking about the latest Twitters and stuff like that. You know, social media more than the match, and that really annoys me. Like, being an old school fan, I want them. I was brought up with like Jim Ross and Gorilla Monsoon, and I want to hear the match, not about the Twitter pages. You know.
Yeah, I respect that, and I agree. You know, it's a different business. It's an entertainment business.
Yes.
Now. You're putting on you're not putting on a 3-hour show that 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden bought tickets to see, and that are diehard fans that believe that think it's real, and that if anybody else watches on TV, good. You know, that's cool too. You know, if we get a few thousand people that watch Madison Square Garden Network and watch our product, that's cool. But I don't think they were getting any major revenue out of the Madison Square Garden Network. Their revenue came from the 20,000 people who bought tickets to see the shows every month.
Yeah.
So it's a different beast. Now you have to entertain people. You know, you got 5,000 channels.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I was shocked. I was flipping back and forth between some other stuff on Monday night and Raw, and one of the shows I was watching ended at 9 o'clock.
Right.
So I flipped back to Raw. Well, Raw was in a commercial at 9 o'clock. I was shocked. I'm guessing whoever timed that show probably timed it wrong, because the number with so many channels. You know, I was talking to my wife about this. I told her I'm shocked. So many channels that are out there, starting new programming at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, yeah.
The last thing you want is to give your audience a chance to go find another show.
Yeah.
There's so many options out there. So, and I'm sure, not to blame anybody. I'm sure that you know, hell, you can't get it right every Monday, every Friday, every hour on the hour. Segments go long, segments go short. You know, life goes on, and those things happen. But I would guess, as a general rule, the idea is to never be in a commercial at an hourly or a half-hourly break, to give to people a chance to change the channel and find another show. And that's what's fundamentally changed the wrestling business. Nobody thought of that 30 years ago. They called the matches. They promoted what they were supposed to promote for wrestling. There wasn't social media. There wasn't a WWE network to promote. There wasn't 5,000 channels to jump to and competition, and NFL Monday Night Football, which isn't on now, but, you know, it's big competition when it's on.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just the way that life has changed. I mean, you know,
Definitely.
Back then there was 10 wrestling magazines on the shelves, and everything you read in a wrestling magazine was 2 months old. Well, obviously there's no wrestling magazines anymore for the most part. I think the last surviving one is PW Insider, and I think they come out quarterly. I may be wrong, but I think that, and that's because of the internet.
Yeah.
Who wants to read, you know, stuff that's, you know, I had to come, my parents were in town. We had a conversation about magazines and newspapers as a whole, you know, not being in print versions for very much longer. And so that's the prediction. And of course, because who wants to wait? You know, if I want to see the latest updates for where the missing plane is, instead of waiting for tomorrow's newspaper to hit my doorstep, I just turn on CNN, Fox News, you know, the internet, I don't even have to go to the TV anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not a big Twitter guy, but, they'll send me stuff in Twitter if you sign up, I guess. My wife tries to explain it to me. I'm going to try to get involved. But anyway, so, everything's immediate now.
Yes.
So it's just the world has changed.
I know that.
If I have a problem with my cell phone, I go to my kids.
I know that Michael Cole.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
I know that Michael Cole gets a lot of stick for what he does, and basically all he's doing is what he's told to do, with the WWE app and taking the selfies and all that kind of stuff. Did you see any of that?
If I watch Raw, I usually fast forward through it. Fast forward through it.
Right.
Nothing against their product.
And this is.
It's top notch. It's just. I don't know. I guess I've grown older, and I'd rather watch a football game, but I still love wrestling, and I still like to follow the news and stuff like that. I'll watch it.
I think it's too long as well.
Then I got to pick my battles with the wife. So not that we don't have another TV, but we have the one big one in the living area. So I don't see why people would get mad at Michael Cole. He's doing what they told him to do.
Yeah, exactly.
The guys are doing what they told him to do. If the heel announcer says something that Vince McMahon wants him to say, he's being told to say it by Vince McMahon in his ear. I don't know that for a fact, but that from everything I've heard from Mick Foley when he was in TNA to the stuff he's talked about.
Yeah.
Taz, when he's constantly talking to the guys in their ear, telling them what to say. I mean, I'm sure it's all blocked out on the format, okay, after this match, we're going to go through the WWE app and we're going to have these Twitter hashtags trending, ready to be up there just in case they're trending. And I don't even know how any of that works, how stuff trends. I see it on screen.
Yeah.
Hashtag Hulk Hogan trends. What does that mean? 1,000 people Twittering it? Or 100,000 people tweeting it? Whatever it is. I have no idea. But to them, they think it's important, and obviously it is important, or else they wouldn't be wasting a lot of time doing it. I want to go back, if you don't mind, and tell you my Ric Flair story.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So before I go up to work at WCW, Bob Roop WCW was having a show, live television taping at the Night Center in Miami.
Right.
And the guy who was the promoter was a guy by the name of Danny Miller.
Right.
And old time, it was a Miller Brothers tag team. He was the local guy when Florida Wrestling promoted. So when they WCW started promoting in Florida, he was their local guy. So Bob Roop called up Danny Miller and said, "Hey, Danny, I had a friend. He's like my business partner. He loves wrestling. If there's anything he could do to help you out when WCW's down there, why don't you, will you meet him and see if there's anything that you could, he could help you do?" So I went to the Night Center about 5 o'clock. I waited and met Danny Miller. Danny Miller said, "I really don't have anything for you to do, but if I do, I'll come find you. Why don't you, the guys that are here," because there were some job guys that I had booked up in Atlanta, enhancement guys. And he said, "Why don't you go to the dressing room and talk to the guys?" So I'm in the dressing room talking to the guys, and different wrestlers walk in, Rock and Roll Express guys like that. Either said hello or they just ignored me, which is fine. I was, I was a little marking out a little bit, but by that time I had already, ring announced with some pretty big names. Right. And not those type guys, but I was over my, my phase of, oh my God, they're all buddies and all that. And so Ric Flair comes in. And he comes up to me and says, "Hey, kid, who are you?" I tried to explain, my name is David Penzer, Danny Miller. "I don't care who Danny Miller says you to be here. Are you a wrestler?" I said, "No, sir." I ring it out. "I don't care." And I'm actually being quiet. He was screaming at me. I'm being quiet. And he basically chewed me out, spit me out, and threw me out of the locker room.
Damn.
And because that was kayfabe. That was what they did.
Yeah.
In the business. So when I got big circle back, I got my first big break to go up and meet Jody Hamilton and drive some of the job guys up. Bob Roop is an agent.
Right.
I called Bob and I said, "Bob, my biggest fear is that if I get there before you and Ric Flair sees me, he's going to remember me and throw me out again." Now, I didn't know what I know. I didn't know back then what I know now. What I know now is two things. All I would have to say is I'm here with Joey Hamilton. It would have been fine. And number two is he wouldn't have remembered me just because he doesn't. He sees so many people at the bars, at the show. He wouldn't have had any clue who I was. But I didn't know that. In my mind, that's my biggest nightmare. So I get to he said, all right. He said, I'm going to get there at 3. You get there at 4. I'll have an hour. Bob said this. I get there at 4. I find Jody Hamilton. Jody Hamilton says, all right, well, thanks for bringing the guys. This is before I was running the wrestlers, go kind of hang out.
Right.
I said, is Bob here? He said, oh, no, Bob, you haven't heard? Because there were no cell phones back then. He said, Bob had a car accident. He's not going to be here tonight. He was fine, but he's not going to be here.
Right.
I spent the rest of the entire night hiding from Ric Flair, paranoid that this guy was going to ruin the one chance I had to get my foot in the WCW door. When I finally told Rick the story when we became friendly, he didn't remember it. He apologized. The guy's such a nice guy. He goes, oh my God, David, I'm so sorry. I'm like, what are you sorry for? It was kayfabe. You're doing what you're supposed to do. But I mean, but it's kind of a funny, just how somebody, you never know how you're going to act when you have an opportunity to do something that you love, and the fact that he had kicked me out once, in my mind, he was looking for me. And truthfulness, he wouldn't have recognized me if you lined me up with 10 people and said, who's the guy you kicked out of the Night Center? So that's a kind of, to bring it all back around to how I got my start. That's a Ric Flair story for you.
That is very cool, man. I like that story.
It's fun to tell in hindsight.
Yeah.
At the time, I was petrified.
Let's talk the Hulkster. What is the Hulk actually really like?
Oh, I love him. Great guy. One of the first experiences I ever had with Hulk Hogan was, he came into WCW.
Right.
I was, the backup ring announcer still, and he's Hulk Hogan. He's the biggest star in wrestling. So I wasn't afraid to if he said something to me, to answer him, but I wasn't going to try to get in his universe. I kind of knew where I stood, and I wasn't going to try to get in his universe. But back then, this was a pay-per-view at St. Petersburg at the Bayfront Center.
Right.
And so one of my jobs was still to run off the formats when they were ready to be run off and distribute them to the people that needed the formats. So turns out that the copy machine was in this out-of-the-way room up in the second floor in the place that there were no dressing rooms set up. There was really nothing set up. So I went in there to make my copies, and I'm making the copies, and in walks two parents and an extremely, and I'm so sad, especially, having kids, an extremely extremely ill child. He obviously was born with spinal difficulties and mental difficulties. God bless him. And, so I said, could I help you? And yeah, we're here to meet, it's one of the wrestlers. And I said, okay, just mind me, In walked Hulk Hogan.
No.
And this kid went crazy. The parents were crying. Hulk sat there and talked to them and took pictures for 20 minutes. There were no cameras. There were no reporters. If the copy machine hadn't have been in there, the only people that would have known were Hulk, the parents, and the kid.
That's really cool.
That showed me in my mind, no matter what you say about Hulk Hogan and all the bad things that people say, he didn't have to do that, and he didn't have to spend 20 minutes with him. He could have walked in there, shook their hand, took a picture, walked out. He was in the main event of a pay-per-view, and this guy spent 20 minutes with a severely handicapped child and his family, with nobody else knowing about it. And
that is really cool.
That tells me everything I need to know about Hulk Hogan. Is anybody perfect in life? No. But I'm certainly not perfect, and I'm sure Hulk would be the first person to say he's made a share of mistakes. We all do. But that tells me all you need to know about the guy's heart.
Yeah.
And so I got the honor to get to know Hulk later on through the XWF, which was a small project that never ended up getting on the network, and through the Hulk Hogan and Friends shows that we've done, me being the MC, one in New York, one in Toronto, and I think he's a real class guy. I really do.
He gets such a bad rap, and I always find he seems really, really professional, man. I mean, I saw him on Raw on Monday night, and I just think he does his job to the hilt. He's a legend.
He is, and I'll tell you this: there's not another person, let alone I'd say person, not even a wrestler. I don't think there's another celebrity that you can say that if this guy walks through an airport,
right,
everybody's that 90% of the people are gonna turn around and know who that person is and recognize him.
Yeah.
I mean, he has such he's big, muscular. He's got the bandana
and the tash,
mustache, the blonde hair.
Yeah,
The Rock. Huge movie star. Stone Cold Steve Austin. He has a unique look too. But if he's wearing a hat and a pair of sunglasses, some people might walk by him. Even the biggest star, Sylvester Stallone. Most people will recognize him. But Hulk is so unique and has stayed that way and always been Hulk Hogan for 30, 40 years. There's just nobody to compare him to. He's the most recognizable person in the world. And I did some stuff with him and Brooke. Jimmy Hart and I produced Brooke's Showcase when she got her record deal the first time, and I did some promotional stuff during the Video Music Award weekend in Miami with Brooke. And one of the things we did was a meet and greet at a record store right on South Beach. And afterwards, Hulk Hogan went outside and was walking down the street. We were to get to the limo, and I mean, everybody just stopped. Police officers and taxi drivers and people, and he shook everybody's hand.
That's cool.
And my brother was there, and my brother just couldn't believe it because my brother had never been around anything like that. I had been living it for 20 years, but my brother had never been around anything like that, and he just couldn't believe how many people knew this person and how amicable he is, to the everyday person who just wants to shake his hand or say hello. So
how about NWO? Have you got any stories of those guys?
One of the most memorable moments that I remember, you could talk about Nitro moments. I'll always remember two moments to me is the best Nitro moments. And one of them was Scott Hall.
Yeah, man.
In I think it was Macon, Georgia, the same place I did my tryout match. And just we knew that they were coming.
That moment though, that moment is like so iconic. It's used in so many video clips on DVDs and stuff.
Oh, I could sit and watch it right now and watch the whole thing through and still say that's cool as hell because we knew that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were coming. Obviously, it wasn't a secret.
Right.
But what we didn't know is that he was going to come and and play off the whole Nacho Man and
that was awesome.
Gene that the WWE was doing. I'm sure there's some people in WCW that knew that, but most of us didn't. And I just thought that was it was one of the coolest moments. I've seen 50,000 wrestling matches live in my life, probably between being a fan and being a ring announcer.
Yeah.
Maybe more. I've seen a lot of interviews. I've done some, but that's one of the top moments I can remember. And that just really started something really cool. It kind of, I don't think they knew, I don't think after a while they knew where to take it anymore.
No.
Sometimes it's hard to end things. Actually, I kind of thought that the TNA Aces and Eights angle was pretty cool.
Yes.
And I give them props because they kind of ended it when it was time to end it.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to keep going and adding more people and turning baby faces, and they kind of killed them off, and they kind of and I thought the whole angle with Hulk and Brooke and it was good. It was some of the best stuff I had seen TNA do to this date. But I was impressed that they knew when to kill it off and end the angle. Because, it's just human nature when something's working and people are talking about it to want to keep figuring out ways to keep it going. But obviously, and I think anybody involved would tell you, so I'm not saying anything negative about anybody or telling you anything nobody would say, but I think at the end everybody realizes, looking back, it lasted way too long. And
yes.
Kind of dragged out. But at the beginning, it was amazing. And, sitting there in Daytona Beach when Hulk turned heel and cut the promo and dodging the garbage pretty much every Monday night from then on out for years. That was a cool experience and one I'll always remember. The other, actually, I mentioned two Nitro moments. The other Nitro moment was was when Arn Anderson reformed the Horsemen.
Yeah, man.
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Ric Flair, who was supposed to be fired and cut the promo on Eric.
That's right.
Actually, this was back when me and Arn were traveling together, so Arn practiced the promo on me. So I knew it was coming, and I still was marking out. He introduced himself and Benoit and Dean Malenko and Mongo McMichael and J.J. Dillon, and then, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Horseman. I don't know if you remember, he knocked himself on the head. What a goof. I almost forgot. Ric Flair, come on out. And it was just, surreal.
It must have been really cool.
And I actually knew what was going on. About the Scott Hall thing, not knowing what was going on. He had practiced the promo on me driving down the road 20 times, if not 50. So I knew it was coming, and I still marked out. So those are my two memorable moments. I guess third place, honorable mention would be when Arn gave his retirement speech.
Right, yeah.
Only because he's such a good friend, and I had so much respect for him, and I know personally what he had to do was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life. So got a little teary-eyed at that one. And then I guess the last one when we went bye-bye, and that was pretty emotional for me. I'll tell you that much.
I was going to say, how did that feel?
It was surreal. It was surreal to see Jerry Briscoe there at the gorilla position, and Tom Pritchard, I'm sorry, and Shane there, and I didn't know what to think. We were told, and I think they had every intention that they were going to run it as two separate companies, and I was going to be the ring announcer, but that ultimately never happened. I will tell you that as soon as I said goodnight after the Nitro was over, I went back to the gorilla position, and Shane McMahon was there, and he pulled me aside, and he said, you did a really good job. You had a lot of enthusiasm. Appreciate it. To me, that meant a lot.
Right.
Even though nothing ended up coming of it at the time, I figured, Shane just put me over. I'm a shoo-in, but nothing ended up happening. But to me, that was I still remember that compliment, and it was heartfelt. He wasn't BSing me. He could have just. I didn't go up to him and ask for a compliment. He could have said nothing. He could have said thank you. So it was surreal. It was hard. It was really hard.
It was such a wasted opportunity, though, by WWE, I think. The WWE could have done a whole lot better with keeping them separate, don't you think?
No, here's the problem is that, you got the biggest stars all had these guaranteed contracts, and Vince didn't want to pay them, and if they left, then to go somewhere else, and they reached their contracts with Turner. So,
I see.
When your biggest stars, and nothing against either of these guys, especially the first one, because he's a Hall of Famer, but when you do a WCW presentation and the biggest names you have there to kick it off are Booker T versus Buff Bagwell. Now, granted, Booker T was the world champion, and Buff Bagwell was a big name, but you had no Goldberg, you had no Hulk Hogan, you had no Scott Hall, you had no Kevin Nash, no Scott Steiner, no Ric Flair, no
staple.
It was even Diamond Dallas Page was still. He eventually let go of his contract to go to WWE early before it expired. But no Macho Man, none of these guys. That Booker T versus Buff Bagwell would have been a mid-card match back then in WCW. Now Booker T's gone on and had a tremendous career. Buff Bagwell never really caught on anywhere else, but he's a friend, and I wish him the best. And I hear he has a new career now, which is crazy, but whatever makes you happy. I just don't. The names weren't there. If you had all those names there, then I think they had a shot. I really do.
Definitely.
Then they had to combine it with DCW, and then it got all mishmashed, and But I don't think it was WWE's fault. I mean, who wants to pay a guy like Bill Goldberg $5 million? If they don't have to.
Yeah.
The contract. I'm saying $5 million. I don't know if it was 5, 10, 2. It was a considerable amount of money. It was more than I'll see in my lifetime unless I hit the lottery. So,
okay, so we've got to wrap it up. So we're coming up to time. But what I do want to ask you about is obviously we need to have a moment for Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit. I mean, let's have some stories from them guys.
There are a lot of guys that I miss a lot.
Right.
Eddie Guerrero. I did some tours with Eddie and Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit and that group. Some of the most memorable times when you're done. In hindsight, is the traveling, just sitting in a band.
Yeah.
That seems to be what you remember the most.
That's the moments where you can see the real person, though. I think
Yeah, you really can. Dean Malenko traveled with Eddie. God bless him. Kurt Hennig was another one who really hit me hard. Actually, just the show he was in Tampa here to do was the show that me and Jimmy Hart booked at the Florida State Fair. He never made it because he never woke up that morning. And
right.
So that was really hard to have to go out and announce that to people and have to deal with it because he was a great guy. Classic Ribber. So many of the guys. I don't want to leave anybody out.
There's a.
I can't include Chris Benoit on the list.
Right.
One of the greatest wrestlers.
Just because of what he did.
I was very good friends of his. He lived in the same city that I lived in rural Atlanta, Peachtree City. We got to know each other. I don't want to say as well as he knew some of his closer friends, but on a different level.
Right.
Socializing with our wives and our kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And all I'll say is I wasn't shocked.
Right.
I was surprised. I was mortified. I was grief-stricken, but I wasn't shocked.
Do you know what kind of pushed him over the edge? What is your opinion?
I don't know what went on in the mind of Chris Benoit. There are people who will swear that it was concussions.
Right.
That might have been part of it.
Right.
There was a part of Chris that a lot of people didn't see, that he was very good at keeping quiet, that I got a small glimpse of when out socializing in Peachtree City.
Right.
That made me uncomfortable to a point where when it went down, I wasn't shocked like everybody else. I was surprised.
Are we talking drugs?
I was shocked about his son.
Right.
I wasn't shocked about Nancy. He for whatever reason, he had a lot of demons that he was very good at keeping quiet.
Right.
Whether the concussions played a part of it, I'm not a medical doctor. I can't say. I really didn't talk to him a lot in the last couple of years. I don't know what his frame of mind was. I did talk to people who were close with him. I think when Johnny Grunge passed, who was also in that clique, I think that was a big problem because Johnny Grunge was a confidant that both Chris and Nancy could go to,
right,
and not be judged, so to speak.
Right.
Whereas Chris didn't want a lot of his friends to know some of the bad things that the issues that were going on.
Right. Okay, we're sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. David is back on the line. David, we were discussing Chris Benoit and his for the friend of theirs.
Yeah, one of the people that both Chris and Nancy felt that they could both go to with their problems and not be judged was Johnny Grunge from Public Enemy.
Right.
In the same area. He had passed about 6 months before this all went down. I think that they didn't have an outlet anymore to reach out to somebody because Chris didn't want to reach out to the Jerichos and the Chavo Guerreros, and he was too proud to admit. And this is just my belief that he was having problems with his marriage or issues, whatever, because he was a really private guy.
Right.
For some reason, Johnny Grunge was the guy that they felt comfortable talking to because Johnny Grunge was such a character, kind of screw up in real life, always screwing up, not coming home,
yeah.
All kind of, I don't want to talk ill about the past, but I got up at his funeral and everybody else was telling stories about Johnny Grunge, the not wrestler, and I just said, look, the guy loved to have fun. He wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
Nobody is. And but he had a great life, and he loved his kid and his kids, and because I think he had that reputation of making a lot of mistakes in his personal life, I think Chris and Nancy felt comfortable talking to him. Well, when he wasn't there anymore, I just think that was one of the things, and I'll always say to this day, no matter, you could talk concussions, you could talk anything else. I believe if Johnny Grunge was still alive, so would be Chris, Nancy, and their son, God bless him. So,
yeah, it's a real sad story.
Yeah, I've never really talked about it before in public, and I hope I'm not deluged with it's just
No,
I guess I got caught up into it. But when you said Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit in the same vein of wrestlers that have passed, I couldn't just I couldn't use both of them in the same because as much as great wrestlers as they were, as much as I love them both, one passed from a heart attack and the other passed because and took people along the way. And for whatever reason it was, I just I can't. If I had mentioned them in the same sentence, I wouldn't be right. But Chris Benoit was a great wrestler. He had a heart of gold. He was loyal to his friends, but he had demons, and a lot of people have demons. But his just got
definitely.
His got carried away, and it is what it is. You can't go back and change it, and it's a real shame. It's a tragedy. It always will be a tragedy.
Thanks so much for your story. I mean, you didn't have to talk about that, and I really appreciate the fact that you did. So.
I normally don't. I normally wouldn't, but like I said, the way you put them in the same sentence, I couldn't.
Yeah,
I just my mind won't let me go there.
Right.
I can't go there.
Obviously, I didn't mean any disrespect by that. It was just
no. You were just talking in that era that are gone, and there's a difference between even somebody that was doing even somebody who died because there was something in their system. They didn't hurt anybody else.
Yeah.
They hurt the people that they left, but they weren't trying to leave for the most part. So it's just a different situation. Probably better not talked about, but there you got it. So
I'm really glad we did. I think it's made for interesting conversation. So, I mean, do you mind speaking about Eddie?
I was I traveled with Eddie. But I wasn't as close with Eddie.
Right.
I mean, we were good friends. He had a horrible temper.
Right.
Especially when he drank. And I mean, I heard a podcast with Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
And Chavo, and I mean, they admitted it. So I'm not talking. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said by people much closer to him than I. But I can remember one time we were traveling together. It was me and Arn and Eddie and Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit, and it was me and the two Chris's in one hotel room with a rollaway, and Arn and Eddie were rooming together, and we had gone out and had some cocktails, and Arn had stopped and got some food,
right,
and to go, which was Arn's. If anybody knows Arn Anderson knows that back in the day he really didn't eat until he was done with the night, and then he'd get something to go, whether it be Whataburger or Waffle House or whatever. That was sort of his pattern. And so, make a long story short, Eddie wanted some food. Arn wasn't going to give him any food. They would go back and forth. Me and the two Chris's were listening through the wall, cracking up, kind of stirring the pot a little bit, knocking on the door, saying, just give Eddie some food. And Arn would go crazy. And Arn, anybody that knows Arn, when he's the funniest guy in the world, but when he gets in a mood, he has temper too. So they both had tempers. They both had a few drinks, and Eddie got hungry, and he didn't want to hear no for an answer. And Arn wasn't going to give him any food.
Right.
So finally, the manager of the hotel came up and said, "Look, you guys need to quiet down a little bit." And they said, "Okay, we'll promise to quiet down." And I can remember they were like, "All right, we were listening through the wall," and Arn and Eddie were like, "All right, sorry, man. Okay, sorry, I overreacted." And I'll never forget it. He said, "Can I at least have a bite of pie?" And Arn just threw the stuff at him and lost it. And that's just times on the road. I'll never forget that story. Chris and Jericho and Chris Benoit were peeing our pants, and the next day. The cool thing is, the next day we all laughed about it, and we talked about the story for years on end. So it's just some of the fun and little insights of the fun times on the road. That you love to be home with your families, but you got to make the best of the time on the road. And there are a lot of ribs, there are a lot of messing with people, and that's just in the spirit of trying to survive. Going from town, trying to survive going from town to town. 25 days a month.
Yeah, I mean, we have to wrap it up. So I will say, I'm deeply indebted to you, man. It's been amazing. I've loved chatting to you. I really miss you in the wrestling, And it means a lot that you want to be a part of the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I'm honored. Not a lot of people remember they remember the Fink, but not other than Howard Finkel, not even Gary Michael Capetta as the years go by, and he was great too. And he taught me so much. But as the years go by, the ring announcers kind of go towards the back, and that's probably how it should be, because the guys that really deserve it are the guys that are wake up in pain and have hip replacements and knee replacements, and so they deserve to be the memories. And I'm honored that if anybody remembers me or if anybody appreciates what I did, I'm honored. I'm honored that you did, and I'm honored to talk to you for a little while, and maybe hopefully the people that listen to your show will enjoy a little bit of insight from a lifelong fan and somebody who got to be around some of the biggest happenings in at least the 1990s and 80s.
Well, I definitely did. We definitely did, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And that was the legendary David Penzer. What a guest, what a podcast that's made. And it's exclusively right here on Monday Night Carlo. I hope you've enjoyed the special. I hope you've enjoyed tuning in. Thanks so much for your listen, support, and love. And the Carlo will see you right here next week on Monday Night Carlo. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
You have been listening to Monday Night Carlo. The views and opinions expressed by the Carlo are all his own and do not represent any other entity.
Why not come and like the official Monday Night Carlo Facebook page? Facebook.com/Eggett Carl MNC. That's Facebook.com/EGGETTCARL MNC.